know all these things intuitively, but as a director, you have to move beyond your intuition.
Ron Howard has always been the calm one in a storm, a director who believes in respect, kindness, and duty, but his face changes right away when someone asks him about the bad parts of the business that raised him. He once said in a quiet voice, "You wouldn't believe what those legends did when the cameras stopped." It was like he was opening a door that everyone else wanted to stay closed. Howard thought that Hollywood's golden age was never really golden. It was based on violence, silence, and unwritten rules that only people who were part of it knew. There was a time when fame made all mistakes okay, where the stars that made America's dreams come true during the day could ruin many lives at night. Ron Howard is finally ready to say the names that Hollywood used to think were off limits. He has been quiet for decades. Errol Flynn is the first one. He is the bad guy behind the smile. Before there was James Bond or Jack Sparrow, there was Flynn in Hollywood. He was the perfect mix of beauty, danger, and careless adventure. He was the ideal hero on film. Off-screen, he looked a lot more like a predator than a main man. He was born in Tasmania in 1909 and moved to Hollywood in the 1930s. After starring in Captain Blood in 1935, he became a huge star overnight. His fame, on the other hand, went through the roof, and so did the scary stories about his private life. There were stories that everyone in the business knew but didn't dare say out loud. You could say that Errol Flynn was the face of a time. It's also a warning that there is always darkness behind Hollywood's brightest shine that most people never see. Errol Flynn's charm helped the studios build an entire kingdom, and they polished his image until it shined like gold. But under that shine was a man who was falling apart because of pride, excess, and addiction. And by 1942, the Hollywood hero who was always good was a national scandal. In that year, Peggy Satley and Betty Hansen, both teenagers, said Flynn had raped them legally. The case split the country in half overnight when it hit the front page of every newspaper. Some people finally saw him for what he was, a monster. Others said their hero, the daring one, could never do anything bad. Flynn didn't show any fear during the hearing. He laughed. It was like he thought his fame was a wall that no one could break through. Warner Brothers hired the most expensive lawyers in California right away to protect their star. Fans camped outside the courthouse, and executives made sure that some witnesses just went behind the scenes. Flynn was found not guilty in the end, but that didn't make him a good person. It set him free. His actions got worse, louder, and less controlled. When a set of private letters came to light in 1978, the whole illusion fell apart. The women who were afraid of Flynn were made fun of, and he showed that he was a lot more dangerous than the hero America loved. In the past, Ron Howard said that reading about that trial changed his life. "I knew Hollywood would protect monsters as long as they smiled for the camera at that point." Flynn stayed an attractive bad guy in the eyes of the public, but to people who were close to him, he was a warning, a sign of what happens when fame and power take away responsibility. Alcohol, drugs, and losing all of his money started to eat him alive. In Vancouver in 1959, Errol Flynn's body finally gave out. He was only 50 years old at the time. The result of decades of being too much. Heart failure, cirrhosis, and serious stomach ulcers were found in Errol Flynn's body. But for Ron Howard, the rail fight was a lot easier. He died the same way he lived, by taking everything and not giving anything. Flynn's legacy showed how Hollywood's morals can fall apart. It was a warning that charm can hide cruelty and that fame doesn't spare anyone in the end. Next up was Kirk Douglas, a guy who would not back down. Douglas was the most contradictory person in Hollywood during its golden age. Someone who played a role taught honor and justice on screen, but caused fear and shame behind the scenes. Douglas was born Ezer Daniel Danlovic in 1916 to poor immigrant parents. He got through hard times by being very determined. He had everything by the time Spartacus made him a world icon: money, power, and an image that was bigger than life. But the people who worked with him most often remembered a different person. They talked about a rage that was always building up and could explode at any time. People on the crew remembered how Douglas's glare could ruin the whole set and make the actors and helpers very nervous. Deborah Padet, an actress, once said that Douglas didn't just want to control a scene, he wanted to control everyone in it. Howard could feel it too when he was a young filmmaker watching Douglas's performances. Later he said, "That smile hides a kind of anger, that kind of anger that eats away at a person from the inside out," and Douglas would feel that anger for the rest of his long and difficult career. For decades, rumors about Kirk Douglas's behavior towards women have been going around Hollywood. Biographers and insiders have long suggested that he may have been involved in the alleged attack of rising star Natalie Wood, who was only 16 years old at the time. This claim came up again after Wood's death and was later written about by her sister Lana in her 2018 memoir. Doug never went to jail, and the story was buried under Hollywood's machinery of silence, just like the stories of many other important men of his time. The dispute came back after he died in 2020 at the age of 103, not as rumors about idols but as a harsh truth. Doug was a contradiction on set. He had the power to make people smart and scared at the same time. He worked with legendary director Stanley Kubrick twice and said, "He is the most driven man I've ever met and the hardest to control." Ron Howard learnt more from Douglas's success than just his talent or fame. "It taught me something about power." Douglas thought the rules didn't apply to him, and most people in Hollywood agreed. When he accepted a special Oscar in 1996, the world saw an old star who wanted peace and praise. Howard saw something more though, the last thing a man did after running away from his own problems all his life. There was a truth that Hollywood never wanted to face under all the cheers and cameras, that some of its most famous figures became famous not because they were smart or honest, but because they were afraid. Faye Dunaway is the cruel queen, Errol Flynn was the personification of dishonesty, and Kirk Douglas was the personification of uncontrolled anger. Dunaway stood for something colder, pain wrapped in beauty. Ron Howard saw her as proof that Hollywood bad guys didn't always use violence. It could come in the form of power, shame, or an ego so big that it smashed everyone in its path. Dunaway's rise was very quick. She was born in 1941 in Bassam, Florida. From Bonnie and Clyde in 1967 to Chinatown in 1974, she looked like she couldn't be hurt. She was like a movie goddess. Icy, magnetic, and perfect. Even so, behind the glamour, rumors of how mean she was spread all over the business. Crew members said she threw tantrums, made a lot of demands, and treated helpers like they were nothing more than pawns in her perfect kingdom. Ratanya Alda, who played her Mommy Dearest co-star, once said, "You could feel the fear on set. Everyone was ready for her to blow up." When she was playing Joan Crawford, Hollywood's notorious queen of cruelty, Dunaway is said to have behaved the same way she did on screen. Later, director Frank Perry said that her violent outbursts made him think about leaving the job altogether. She threw things, yelled at makeup artists, and once wouldn't let the camera roll until the lights made her look beautiful. Ron Howard used her years later as the best example of what happens when an actor's need for power turns into emotional terrorism. The stories got worse over time. Dunaway is said to have hit a cameraman and spat on a team member on The Wicked Lady. It is said that she made her workers feel so bad about themselves on Don Juan DeMarco that work stopped for a whole day. Jay Bernstein, who used to be her manager, put it simply, "Faye doesn't just act like divas. She really is them." In the 2000s, Faye Dunaway's bad name finally caught up with her. But calls from Hollywood stopped. Directors wouldn't work with her because they said she was too difficult to handle. When Dunaway was fired from a Broadway version of Ted at 5 in 2011, she put the blame on everyone but herself. If a reporter asked Ron Howard about her impact, he would say something calm but sharp. She worked so hard to be perfect that she forgot to be kind. Dunaway's fall was never a surprise. The pieces slowly fell apart. The woman who once seemed untouchable and who ruled Hollywood with icy brilliance ended up alone and was not even invited to screenings of her own pictures. Howard saw her as a reminder of what it costs to be mean, a live warning that talent that doesn't have empathy will destroy itself in the end. "People talk about power," he said one time, "but in Hollywood, power without style is like poison." Then John Wayne, the bad guy of the West, came along. Wayne was one of the most important people in Hollywood. For many, he was the very essence of America, the brave cowboy, the fighter, the man's man. To Ron Howard, who watched him grow up on black and white TV, though the truth behind that rough story was much darker, Howard thought, "When I found out who he really was, I stopped seeing the hero. I saw the mean guy who dressed up as his country." Mary Morrison was born in Iowa in 1907. Wayne worked his way up in the studio system by spreading a myth of unbreakable manhood. He was more than just an actor by the 1950s, he had turned into an idea. Fighting was a sign of weakness. Making progress was lying. He was scary on set. He cursed technicians in front of everyone who didn't do what he asked. Christopher Mitchum, another actor, said, "When Duke was mad, the air froze. Either you gave in to his demands or you left." Ron Howard later said that place was not artistic at all. Fear that looks like control. John Wayne was mean to people outside of work. He put women down in public, made fun of Native American actors in westerns, and ignored black artists who didn't fit the mold. His famous Playboy interview from 1971 is still one of the scariest records from the golden age of Hollywood. Wayne said that Native Americans were hanging on to land for selfish reasons, that black people were not ready to be in charge of their own lives, and that films needed men, not whiners. When these words came up again decades later, they caused a lot of anger, because they showed that the man was not a national hero, but someone who was stuck in hate. Wayne and director John Ford got into a fight on the set of The Searchers, because Ford insisted that racist and angry Confederate Ethan Edwards be played in a sympathetic way. Ford fought back. Wayne said no. In the finished cut, it was clear that both the character and the actor didn't like each other. Howard later studied the play at USC and said, "It's scary because you can't tell where the role ends and the man begins." Wayne never said sorry, not even in his last years. When cancer made him weak, he thought his critics were weak and said that the changing society made him feel alone. He was still praised as an American hero when he died in 1979 at age 72. Still, Howard and other directors used Wayne's story as a lesson. When power comes from bias, it doesn't grow into knowledge. It turns sour and bitter. Howard said that the story lived on, but the person who made it up never deserved to be famous. Then there was Roman Polanski, who was sent away because of his shame. Howard saw in Polanski a truth that Hollywood rarely faces. Evil and brilliance can live together. Before I knew who he was, I liked his works. Howard once said that the business has been plagued by an unsettling duality for decades. But then I realized that ability doesn't make someone innocent. It hides them sometimes. Roman Polanski's rise was very quick, and tragedy seemed likely from the start. He was born in Paris in 1933 to Polish parents and lived through the Nazi rule. He had a shady past long before he became famous. Knife in the Water and Rosemary's Baby, his first big hits, made him known as a visionary and a genius who could turn fear into art. But the dark themes in his works weren't just made up. It showed something about the man. That fantasy fell apart in March 1977. She was arrested for sexually assaulting Samantha Gay, 13, after a picture shoot at the home of Jack Nicholson in Los Angeles. The information was very bad. Polanski admitted that he had sex with a child without permission. Before being sentenced, he left the United States for France and never came back. It split in two in Hollywood. Others protected him as an artist who had been through a lot. When Ron Howard was young, it was heartbreaking to see how the business reacted. After many years, he said, they talked about art while a child's life was broken. Polanski's exile became one of the most lasting moral stains in Hollywood history. He kept making films in other countries, getting praise and even an Oscar in 2003 for The Pianist. Howard said it was both strange and sickening at that time. He stayed seated as the people in the Dolby Theater stood to cheer. I thought about that 13-year-old girl who was by herself and how that cheer must have sounded to her. Howard saw the most important warning in Polanski's story. Even if someone is very smart and beautiful, that doesn't mean they can be cruel. Skill may shine, but darkness can hide behind it, and sometimes it grows uncontrolled. Even after many years, Ron Howard was still angry about how Hollywood was ready to separate genius from guilt. When Roman Polanski won the César Award in France in 2020, there were protests. Howard saw it as a sign that justice would come late, but not too late. The world finally spoke out 40 years after the crime, when they should have done so the very next day. Just because a monster can frame a shot doesn't make him less scary. Howard was angry in an interview with Vanity Fair in 2021. Polanski is still free in Europe, and his name is now linked to lies because he can't be caught. Howard said that his story showed everything that was wrong with Hollywood's golden age. A way to protect the artist while leaving the target alone. He once said that anything is okay in Hollywood as long as the lighting is good. Then there was Mickey Rooney, whose smile told lies. If Polanski stood for lying, then Rooney did the same for deception. The idea that charm could make mean people nice again. Howard was charmed by Rooney's happy musicals as a child. But what was really going on behind that smile shocked everyone. Howard once said that his face was full of happiness, but that smile hid pain, and what's worse, he spread it. Rooney, who was born Joseph Ely, Jr., in 1920, was Hollywood's first real kid star. He was the best-paid star in America by the time he was 18. The all-American boy who sang, danced, and won hearts across the country made MGM a fortune with his smile. But behind the stunning acts, a darker story was told. A man whose good looks hid a history of hurting others, lying, and being mean that not many people were brave enough to talk about at the time. For Howard, Rooney's story, along with those of Flynn, Douglas, Dunaway, Wayne, and Polanski, was a lesson that would be written into the history of Hollywood. Shine can be beautiful, but it can also hide bad things, and the business world tends to praise the shine rather than face the shade. But Mickey Rooney's level of fame changed him early on. He got married 8 times, cheated on his wives all the time, gambled away millions of dollars, and put down the people who loved him. One time, his ex-wife Ava Gardner said that he was the smallest man in the world with the biggest ego. The darkness only got worse behind closed doors. His 8th wife Jan Chamberlain and his grandson were charged with elder abuse and financial fraud in 2011. They were said to have drained Rooney's bank accounts and cut him off from his family. However, the harm Rooney caused others had already become famous decades before that. People who worked with him before remembered him as unstable and mean. He could make you laugh one minute and destroy you the next. Judy Garland, who was his best friend at MGM, told no one else. Garland later said that Rooney, not just the executives, was partly to blame for her pain because she was under a lot of pressure from the studio heads and her feelings were broken. When the 1960s came around, Rooney's success fell apart. He was always dealing with addiction, poverty, and scandal. He bragged in an interview in 1979, "I've lived 1,000 lives." Ron Howard later thought about how he had lived them all for himself. Rooney was always angry, even when he was old. He said that studios, wives, and even God were to thank for his fall. It was worth less than $20,000 when he died in 2014, at the age of 93. After friends raised money for a simple service, his body was buried in Los Angeles after no one claimed it at first. Howard's story about Rooney was the last part of a painful trend. It showed that smiles from the golden age were often just masks. Rooney made everyone laugh even though he was really sad. And that might be the worst kind of evil. No one sees when pain turns into performance. Ron Howard never wrote these stories to get even. It was a warning. There was no gold in Hollywood's golden age. It was built on broken lives hidden behind fame, quiet, and being used. Howard once said, "The scariest monsters aren't in scary films. The spotlight looks out for them." Which one of these 6 stars shocked you the most? The hunter, the tyrant, or the liar with a smirk? Leave your thoughts in the box below.